This video is about how I optimize DNF after a new installation of Fedora. DNF is the package manager for Fedora, used to install and remove software and update the operating system. When DNF is run, it reads a configuration file, and I'll show you what is in that file by default. Using the nano editor, and I'm going to use the sudo command because it takes administrative access to make modifications to this file. So the administrative command, then the name of the editor, and the file I want to edit. The default location for this DNF configuration file is etc DNF, and the actual configuration file itself is dnf.conf. Okay, this is the default settings for this configuration file. 5 lines under the main section. It does not need to be edited, but I do it because I think it runs better, and I wouldn't do this if I had an old computer, but I do it on a modern computer. Essentially, out of these, I add 2 extra lines, and I modify this one, so I think that's a total of 3 changes. This install only limit equals 3 is essentially how many kernels that Fedora has available to boot at any given time. And let's talk about what a kernel is. It's this kind of kernel, not this kind. It's like a kernel of popcorn. I guess this is the best definition. The essential part of something. So, it's like the heart of the operating system. Think of it that way. For example, in Windows, when Windows boots, it loads the kernel and it runs the operating system, and you only have one kernel running and one kernel available. When you run Windows updates, it may apply kernel updates after it restarts, but you only ever have one kernel available to run. Whereas in Linux, with various distributions such as Fedora, you have the option to keep multiple kernels available to boot. So, for example, I'll give you a scenario. You do a fresh install off of a USB stick onto a computer and install Fedora, and it has a kernel on the installation media. Well, with any operating system, whether it's Windows or Linux, the first thing you do after you install it is you run updates to get all the latest updates applied. And when you do that with DNF and Fedora, you're going to get a kernel update that's available since the installation media was made, and that's going to apply the new one. But with this setting, it will keep the old one. It'll keep it. It'll have the newest one, and then the 2 older ones available to choose from. So when you boot Fedora, you can choose from up to 3 kernels in the list. I typically change this to 6. So that would mean that I would have the ability to boot the latest kernel and 5 previous ones. I find that the kernel updates come out quite often, and if I do them as often as they come out, then I want that number to be larger. Whereas if I maybe update once every 2 weeks, that's not necessary. 3 is good enough. I wouldn't go any higher than 6. So that's my recommended setting. So let's take a look at how I change this file. I'll load in the changes now using if you look down here on the bottom, this bracket, like bracket X, I guess that's a bracket. No, a caret, I'm sorry, it's a caret symbol. For example, read file caret R, that means that's the control button. So the caret symbol means hold the control key down and press the R key. So we'll read in the changes, and now I'll load the file that I want. Okay, so Just like above, I've got a main section and 5 yellow lines. But here we can see that I've changed it to 6 as opposed to 3. And these blue lines are text that follows a pound sign, which it means it tells the configuration to ignore that. It's just for reference, for reading, to explain what these settings do to make it easier to understand. Now in this first comment, I've got the actual URL to the website that explains these settings and what changes you can make, and we'll take a look at that here. Let's spread that out a little bit. There's the web address here, also known as the URL, and as you can see, here's references for the DNF utility. Here's a property, and it explains what it does and the values it can be. So that's where I got those explanations from. It makes it easier when you forget to understand what something like delta RPM equals true, what that means. Alright, back to this. The changes I make. Oh, I guess I make 4 changes. The last 3 lines here and the one with the kernel number. Fastest mirror equals true. When DNF is run, it builds a list of the fastest mirrors and uses the fastest one and goes to that repository to download the updates. Max parallel downloads, the default is 3. I set it to 6 because I have a new computer. And finally, delta RPM equals true. Say for example this nano editor is version 5.3, and I check for updates, and nano 5.4 is out. So what it would normally do is pull that whole new file down to the computer and overwrite the 5.3 version. Well, with delta RPM equals true set, that will just download the difference between the old file and the new file, and then apply that to the old file, making it like the new file. It takes less bandwidth to download doing that, so the downloads are quicker, and it uses the CPU power of your computer to make those intensive changes. So that's essentially it. Those are the changes I make. So when I install Fedora, the first thing I do is make those changes and then update the operating system and go from there. So now I'm going to go ahead and apply those changes. So I'll highlight the old default settings and do a Control K to cut those out. And then looking at the bottom, I'll do a Control O to write those changes. Press Enter to accept the default file to overwrite. And I am done. Control X to quit out of the nano editor. And just to check, let's take a look and see if that's exactly, if those changes applied. And we see that it did. Here's another useful command, especially if you have more than one kernel installed. Every once in a while you'll want to know what, if you didn't remember to look when you boot it up, you can see what you've got once Fedora is running by typing this. DNF list kernel. It'll show you the kernels you have available to boot that are already installed, and anything that can be downloaded. So here we see I've got this kernel version installed and running, and then this one is available to be downloaded, and if I did that, then it would be the current kernel. So those are the changes I make to DNF when I first install Fedora, and thanks for listening, and if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thank you.